huge pleasure to talk to you.
Pleasure.
I'd like to
You
start
too.
off by talking about the topic that how to play the guitar and why your, so to say, comedic masterclass on Audible and your new record, The Boy
Yeah.
Named Biff, have in common, which is like the, as you say, the departure of the state of wonder, which is a topic that's kind of present in both. And I wonder if we could start off talking about that.
Well, I have held this notion that your own curiosity will tell you how far you want to go with any instrument that you play. Formal lessons on the piano tend to immediately attach your eye to the page and your brain to your hand. So you see notes on the stave and you are trained to find them on the keyboard. Of course, many people approach the guitar in a much more fundamental way. In the instrument is facing away from you, for one thing, so it's not easy to look at your hands. So you have to do a lot of things on trust, and the fluency of your playing comes from repetition, like all practice. But my argument is that if you begin in the key of C, which is the easiest key to read music in, you are going to run into a chord of F, which is mechanically very challenging for a beginner. So my simple idea, and I tell this in a hopefully much funnier way in the piece, is to start in another key, most likely the key of G, and allow yourself the pleasure of playing songs. And you have this wonder that you can suddenly play some songs that you might have regarded more sophisticated because of their emotional content. That's why I chose a Hank Williams song with a lot of emotion to it. You couldn't believe it actually could be so simple in structure, musically speaking. And you have the pleasure of playing that, and that pleasure inspires your curiosity to add to the chords that you can play. And with each chord you add, you suddenly find more and more songs. And I think for most people, this is the beginning of a discovery of harmony and the relationship and how chords are formed, and all the things that you would have learned in a much slower, more deliberate way at the piano can be chance encounters. And that's why I told it with reference to my own false starts and the curious thing that I actually, for myself, I learned a very complicated song first because I was so driven to play it, Peter Green's Man of the World. But that isn't for everybody. Some people just like to play 3-chord songs, 4-chord songs, and then stop. That's all they want to do. They just want to play it at a party or at a campfire or to the loved one, or, and the reasons for playing and the motives for playing are also part of this story. But most of all, that word play, which is where it connects perhaps to The Boy Named If, because as you say, there's something running through a few of the songs on this record which is in common with the Audible piece, that is letting go or recognizing that borderline between wonder and disillusionment of one kind or another, the loss of innocence or the discovery of other thrills, different thrills that you find out about as you leave the innocence of childhood and become first a teenager, then a young man with no sense of responsibility, then later on, have to deal with those consequences in various different ways. So these are all little stories about that. I perhaps would have written them differently at another time in life, but I'm writing them now, so this is the way they came out. I have the benefit of being able to look in both directions, forward down a very short road and backward down a very long road.
Do you think, for example, this state of wonder in playing and this innocent, like beginner's mind approach, as they maybe would say in Buddhist, in Zen Buddhism, do you think this also applicable to something like jazz, like where maybe playing is a bit less intuitive and more heady until you get to the...
No, because I think, depends on who the players are, but I think, the understanding of harmony necessary to be a really interesting improvising musician in jazz requires a grounding in harmony, which is far more complex than most pop or rock and roll musicians ever consider. It just is, just like classical musicians or have techniques. They don't all play any way they feel. They play the way they're directed, and they hone the skills to play. If it says espressivo, then they play it that way. If they don't, they don't suddenly add a lot of their own idea, because it would be anarchy, wouldn't it? If everybody in the orchestra chose a different way to interpret any 8 bars of music. That's why it's a symphony. It's a concert together. There's a kind of a purpose, and they're not asked to. It's not like they're not asked to play with emotion or expression, but but it has to be in a uniform. It has to be throughout the section under the direction of the conductor or the composer's intention. If it were just random, it wouldn't sound like anything. It would just be chaos. And some kinds of chaos are great, as we know from rock and roll. Some kinds of rock and roll are chaotic, and that's wonderful. So there's room for everything. I have no definitive theory about music, and I just wrote this piece. I was asked to write something. I had written a very long book about my family's history and music, 3 generations, and maybe that was a slightly romanticized tale, but it was important for me to write it at the time I did. I left a lot of things out. I didn't write it a conventional memoir in sequential chronological order, which frustrated some people, but that was the way I felt it should be written. So there are other things from your experience in music that I can tell a different way, and this was one of them. This talking book about the guitar allowed me to have some fun with the telling. As you hear, it's a piece that's probably more indebted to radio comedy, BBC radio comedy, than it is to rock and roll. I'm playing some music throughout it, playing music almost constantly through the soundtrack of it, but the way the story is told is deliberately supposed to be comedic, and that comedic presentation allows you then to stop for a moment and say something very serious and heartfelt that is the heart of the matter, and that happens several times throughout the 90 minutes. And I suppose that's the same as an album. You have an up-tempo tune that lifts everybody's spirits, and you drop into a ballad that is more contemplative, and you see those contrasts on this new album, and you see it on all the albums, really. You use different tools for each task,
I found it brilliant because there was also a bit hidden in the humor, was also a bit of spiritual guidance, so to say, as a musician.
Well, it would just be a frivolity if you didn't, in the final, few minutes of it, when I'm talking about remembering to play as you did as a child, I think that's very important, because it's the inhibition. We can all turn handstands and draw magical inventions when we're very free in our imagination. We can all sing and skip and do all these things and dance. Many of those things you become too self-conscious to do them, like a very short time after you are able to do them, and it gets progressively harder to let yourself go unless you've drunk a bottle of vodka or something, or swallowed some particular kind of pill to lose your inhibitions, the way people sometimes, they can only dance when they're drunk, because they're too self-conscious to do it just out of the sense of joy. When you're a child, it's not so much. Unless somebody points at you, of course, and says you must do it on cue, and then you become, even from very young, you can be terribly self-conscious, But that's what some of the things I was writing about in these new songs, these latest songs. And I suppose, it does share. That's interesting I didn't know that you had heard that piece. I wasn't sure you could hear the audible piece in Europe. I know they can't hear it in England for some reason. That's frustrating. I don't know why that is. Something to do with the rights.
I was wondering, as one of the great songwriters of our time, would you say those principles also apply to songwriting, or can be somehow applied to songwriting?
I don't know. I mean, if anybody ever wanted me to do it, I would love to write how to write a song and why. I could write the same I could answer the same question, but I'm sure the inquiry would go a different way. Because the way that you can write songs, I could cite like numerous different examples of how to do it. That wouldn't mean that would be any use to anybody trying to do it for themselves, because it's a little bit like trying to paint a picture for somebody else. You know, you see the proportions and the color. You can study as it tells you to do it in a book, but you know, look at the history of art. There's all sorts of people breaking every rule in the book in order to do something imaginative that they felt, you know. So which is superior, the classical dimension or the totally expressive? And that's very true of instrumental playing. Some people playing, you know, pushing the instrument beyond the bounds of its natural register to create an effect, or somebody writing a song in using very few words, or another person uses a lot of words. Some people use very specific meanings. Some people like to keep the meanings more mysterious and opaque, or written in a way that stimulates the imagination of the listener rather than tells them exactly what's happening. You know, you leave some shadow in the room in which things may occur in the mind of the listener. And I've adopted all of those approaches over so many songs I've written. I don't find there's one way to do it. Otherwise, I just do it all day long, you know.
Now, talking about the new record, the most complete way to experience the new record would be the hardcover edition with the short stories and the drawings. And I know that some of the short stories kind of are preceding the song, some go further.
Yeah. Some sort of like are maybe a little more of the background detail. You know, the song is the foreground of the picture. The short story is the middle distance. Of course, I don't want anybody who only listens to records whatever way they can get them. You know, there's a whole range of ways you can listen. You can get a cassette of this, you can get a vinyl record, you can get a stream, you can get a download. I don't want people to think they have an inferior rendition of this record. It was written as a group of songs. At the time we originally planned its release, there was actually such a shortage of vinyl. The record company told me it is only going to be a download and stream. There is no way to manufacture a physical record. And I did think then something which has come up in the papers only in the last few weeks, a very successful artist, you know, requested that people listen to the record in sequence initially, not shuffle it. And I can understand that, because you spend a lot of time telling a story where one thing proceeds into the next. And really the streaming is a really useful thing, because it gives you access to music in lots of places where you couldn't listen to music before. But the danger, of course, is that you just take all this group of songs that you've tried to write as clearly as possible and record as well, and just throw them into the stream. It's really like a stream. It's like it just goes away. And what was that? Where's all my songs gone? They just, you know, floated away. A physical object at least gives people the opportunity to have a moment of contemplation and a relationship, which I've enjoyed myself with predominantly vinyl records. And I had this idea that I've thought about for a long, long time, you know, to write these kinds of short stories, giving other insights into the story of a song. I thought about doing it many times. I started to do it many years ago and didn't carry on with it. And in this case, it just all came to me very quickly. And I draw all the time. Over the last few years, there's been a few more difficult emotional things that come with life, you know. The loss of my mother particularly died earlier this year, and she had ill health for the last couple of years. So I spent a lot of time visiting her, and some of the time she wasn't conversational. So I found it quite calming to sit quietly in a room, just to be with her, observe, and sometimes draw. Not draw her, just draw anything. and I would just lose myself in that. The way another time I would have picked up a guitar, but you know, if somebody's trying to sleep, you can't be playing the guitar all the time. And so I found something, another thing that I could do with my, you know, imagining, and somehow they all joined up. You know, it all joined up. I felt that it was the right thing to create a storybook, because I always thought this record was called The Boy Named If being imaginary friend. And I knew the songs spoke of the moment where you leave childhood for some of the frightening things of adulthood, and then carry on through young manhood into looking back, a person who's had experience and even some disgrace, looking backward. So there would be these pictures of all of these people in song. So why could there not be pictures in other words, and literally pictures representing them, or representing some scene in their life? Give somebody something to hold. I mean, I still like to see a physical record, read all the detail, even the printing line, you know, at the bottom. So that's why I created it, and I think it looks really beautiful. I saw the first copy of it, and I think regardless of whether people like the artwork, it's something they respond to. The object of the book is something that I've created for people who want to go somewhere different, you know.
But there wasn't like a short story that led into the writing of the song. So the songs,
all the songs were written first, and I wrote the short stories in response to the songs.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you draw as an artist, as a visual artist, are you still drawing with the iPad and with the pencil?
Yeah, I only draw with an iPad. I think it would take me a very long time to gather the skills, that you know, the techniques of illustration and brushwork and things like that the electric pencil can imitate. So that's why I don't have any particular high opinion of this work. I see it as ephemeral, a kind of you know, it's been another element of stage productions in the last few years. We've had background screens. The most recent tour we didn't have any. I don't feel I have to always have it, but it's something that I can do, and I have fun with it, and you can put different juxtapositions. And as you may know, I did a tour called Detour, where I use a lot of photographic resources to have reference points for the stories I was telling or the songs I was singing. Other times I don't feel the need of that, and the same is true of the illustrations on the last few records. They give these particular records an identity, which is directly from me. It's not some art director's notion. There may be more finished, more technically perfect versions of this, but it is directly from me, and that's what's happening. You know, I'm not asking for a round of applause or consensus about this, but that's what gives it its identity. Just like having a funny name and being in show business does, it marks you out from other people. Call John Smith or something like that, a plainer name, you know. It's the same kind of thing. And most importantly, I enjoy doing it. So why would I not do it, you know? I enjoy it. I find it contemplative, funny, just like writing songs is. I mean, there's all different sorts of moods songs put you in. They shouldn't be arduous to write. They should be joyful to write, and try to make everything serve a purpose.
And you're using the synonym Iman Singer for the visual artwork.
I've used that for a long time for anything visual. Yeah. I'm Lens O'Toole when I point a camera. I mean, they're just silly names that I made up, you know.
Great. Yeah. Now, the new record is the first record with the current band since 2018.
Yeah. That's not so long ago.
Not so long ago.
But everything has been going on. That's not so long ago.
That's true. Yeah. You've had it seems that the time of the pandemic, which is like two or 3 years, has been immensely creative for you. if had the Spanish record, the French EP, Hey Clockface, and now this record.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the bear in mind that I think we had begun Spanish Model around the time that we were making Look Now. That process had already begun. But of course, it takes a long while to get so many artists behind the microphone and get them. They have to be happy that their adaptation. We found the right singer for each song, the right combination of singers, the right group, the right lyricist to adapt the words where the singer did not want to adapt them themselves. There were a lot of contributors to that record, and it took a while, and then it was almost ready to be released. And then, of course, the circumstances of the last 18 months or so had very dramatic impacts on the economies of some of the countries, particularly in Latin America. So that record was held back from release initially. On the other hand, I had been in Helsinki and Paris immediately before we were obliged to curtail our last UK tour, March of 2020. So I had begun recording Hey Clockface. Well, I didn't know it was called Hey Clockface then. I was recording songs. I didn't know where I was starting or where I was going to end. I had one idea about going to Helsinki. I had another idea about going to Paris. I had a session booked for London that never happened. And who knows what songs we would have recorded there. I ended up completing what became Hey Clockface with the help of my friend Michael Leonard, who gave me 2 pieces of music, which sort of created the connection between the music recorded in Paris and the music recorded in Helsinki. And almost as soon as we had delivered that record, was, about the time that I think everybody in the Imposters started to, particularly Pete Thomas and I, say, well, it seems that we're going to be sitting here for a while. It doesn't look like we're going back out there this year, maybe not even next year. We had better do something. And what is that something? When you record in a studio, engineers are often seeking separation. Separation to give clarity to the recording. They want to put the singer in a booth. They want to put the drums in a booth. They want to put the loud amps out in the hallway or something like that, so everything doesn't become chaotic. Well, if you're thousands of miles away, you've got maximum control, And sometimes I did feel that when I listened to some music recorded in this interlude, the music itself seemed to be very cautious and timid. And I didn't want to do that. So Pete and I got about a dialogue between drums and guitar and voice, which set the scene for songs like Farewell OK and Penelope Halfpenny, and these quite forceful tellings of these stories. Whatever the stories were, I wanted them to kind of jump out. Then Davey added the bass, and they sounded pretty fine just with 3 of us. Truthfully, we sent a couple of tracks to Steve, and he said, what am I supposed to play on this? Haven't you finished this already? And I go, no, dude, there's definitely some things it needs, So that's why you hear him coming in a space, like on Magnificent Hurt. He comes in on the Vox Continental, and everybody notices the Vox Continental because it's a sound that they associate with Steve. But it doesn't really appear that often in the record when you listen. It's not like constant. It's not really leading. But it's just the right place to play. And of course, then as the record developed, there were other songs where he was all of it, like The Man You Love to Hate is almost completely Steve, So I think we all contributed very in balance in this. It was very much and the fact that we weren't in the room together really doesn't matter to me, not a little bit. I don't think it would have been any better if we had been. I think we actually kind of made some choices that were, because we were recording like this, it gave us put us all everything has got to really count. Nobody can hide, Not that I ever think that's the intention,
But it was a new situation. You didn't record in a similar or that way with this band, separate.
We'd never done a record quite like this. Of course, some of Hey Clockface, the last couple of things were done that way. but they were fairly complete sounding. Whereas here we were actually, we were going guitar and drums, the guitar, bass and drums, then add keyboards. Then sometimes I'd sing something again, or we'd add harmonies, So really not so very different to the way you work in a single studio. We just were all in our own spaces, and some of those spaces were very unusual. Pete's down in his basement with his drum kit, which is the same one he played on Spanish Model, on this year's model. That's the kit that he uses to practice on, his old Gretsch kit. He loves it. He's very comfortable on it. He's in his own house, and I'm out in the back garden singing, wherever I could, in a cupboard under the stairs. Doesn't matter. If you feel good, you have nothing to fear. And as you say, we, Steve, Muriel and Ajouk had worked on the translations, musical adaptation. We had got in touch with Iggy for the La Face EP, two wonderful renditions of Revolution 49 by Isabella Joigny, which was like something out of a dream, to have this incredible voice reciting and then hearing us sing. She's got a beautiful singing voice. Shegway, this great Franco-Cuban Congolese band, that did an adaptation. And we just continued to, that seemed to be in the same spirit as what we'd been doing with Spanish Model. People didn't know about that yet. But we, it was very, I was very grateful to the people that came in for that record. They brought a lot of heart and integrity and humor in some cases. You listen to Fita Paez's interpretation of Radio. He's telling a different story than I told in 1978. It's got a lot of wit. And I've ended up singing on a song with him where we sing in our own languages. I sing in English, he sings in Spanish, and that track's just come out this week. So I feel as if the opportunity to work with people, not necessarily for whole records, but just for one occasion, should be there. I mean, we have a lot of freedom to do these things, and distance and the circumstances of this moment won't pertain forever. But we hope anyway, I've just done 22 dates in America, so that proves the point,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you have obviously also experience in revisiting your own your own earlier material, which you did, I think, 6 years ago with The Roots, where how does it, do you learn new stuff about your own songs when you go back after,
Yeah, well, that was sort of like in the spirit of collage, because I reset some words that I wanted to combine the themes of songs written for different occasions with a new accompaniment, and the rhythmic drive of Quest's drums particularly, and then the orchestration that we built around it with guitars, with Kirk's guitar and horns and vocal groups that I recorded. We had a mixture of reset lyrics and brand new lyrics. I mean, there were some very intense lyrics in that collection. One of, the most specific song I wrote about my father's death is on that record. Most of the record is outward looking at the world, looking at some things which I felt like there were some lyrics that I had written in 1990, and I wanted to sing them again with a different rhythm to hear that same story, because if you looked at the world, the things that it spoke about, this song was originally called Invasion Hit Parade. It was all stuff that was still happening. And I thought singing it again with a different rhythm kind of adds to the poignancy of, these same blunders in the world happening over and over, these same sadnesses. I'm very proud of that record. I think it's unlike anything many people have done. Of course, the world of rhyming and verses of hip-hop has got some incredible work within it, and also some things that are just supposed to motivate getting on the dance floor. They're not all like poetic flights, but the ones that are like Black Thought's work is incredible. We did a piece with T-Bone Burnett, which still hasn't been released, called I don't want to say what it's called because he may change the title, but there's a lot of us performing on it. It's a long piece, and Tariq and I appear alternately on it. So there's a very interesting, there's it like I say, it's another example of, I worked with the Roots and people were surprised that Black Thought wasn't part of the record, but I was the lyricist in that project. But we've since worked together, so it's not like one definitive statement. It's a series of opportunities to work in different contexts, You shouldn't close your mind to anything. Just try everything.
You've written, a couple of years ago, an autobiography that was very highly regarded and very praised by everybody. I was wondering, can you imagine writing another book, be it fiction or a novel or...
Well, I hadn't really imagined it, and then I wrote these 13 short stories, so they were a very different duration to a 600-page memoir of a kind, but it wasn't really a memoir about my career exclusively, was it? It was really the story of 3 generations of musicians, and I keep in my mind that both of my great-grandfather, my paternal great-grandfather, came from Ireland. He was a physical worker. He was a labourer, ditch digger, worked on the docks, and he died in an industrial accident which put his children in an orphanage eventually. And my grandfather, while he was there, learned to play the trumpet. Now, if that accident had not have happened, the more common thing in families of that kind of background would be to follow the father into the same occupation. So by a question of chance, my father's side of my family followed a career in music, which I've carried on, and my brothers have also carried on, my half-brothers. My other grandfather, my mother's father, also worked with his hands. He dug ditches too to lay the gas main. He spent 3 years on a Polish farm as a prisoner of war in the 1418 war. So I think that the path to music that I wrote about in my book was a lot to do with chance. My mother was just a young girl during the Second War, during the 39-45 war, and she left school at 14, and the job she wanted was selling records. It's a coincidence, isn't it, really? Because the two families could have taken different paths. It wasn't very likely that she was going to work with a shovel, So she wanted to do that because she loved music. And that's how my parents met, in a record shop. My father by then was a trumpet player. So, and here I am, like, talking to you about music. It's kind of beautiful, So, but you see that there's a certain amount of chance involved in all of that. Had my great-grandfather not fallen into, into the hold of a ship and a load of coal dropped on his head, his sons might have done the same thing as he did, and we never would have picked up an instrument, any of us. I'd be working there too. Could be. There's, looking at the odds, more of us have worked with the shovel than the trumpet, So I never really forget that, so when I say what I do is a job and not some sort of lucky break, it's because I work at it I work at what I do with the same idea as previous generations worked towards the thing they did, I'm so grateful to them. I think that both the grandparents and parents had a tougher go round than we all do, and hopefully it'll get a little better for the next lot, but it isn't bound to be. We've got to try,
You've famously covered ABBA. You've also once called, I think, Dancing Queen like a heavenly manner of a song. I was wondering...
I love them.
Have you heard any record?
I really, really loved the first single, I Still Have Faith in You. I think it was really exquisite. Does it sound, characteristic? Yes, of course, but why would that not be? Because you hear Benny, really, I heard Benny, and they all contribute, and of course the voices are so amazing. And they have, I worked with Benny on a Sophie von Otter's record, and he was so wonderful to work with. He just was somebody that wanted to play. He would play the accordion if he in a folk club if he could. Which he does, I think. He came and played accordion. He played piano on a version of Like an Angel Passing Through My Room, which is my favorite track on that record. And I've met them all in turn. I think maybe not Agneta. But I was on television with Frida about 10 years ago in Stockholm. It was the first time she'd been on Swedish TV in many years, and I had to sing a song called Jimmy Standing in the Rain from National Ransom, and she was literally sitting opposite me. It was one of those things where they have all the guests on together, and it was the most unusual circumstances. There was the host, Frida, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. It was not a combination in the audience that I ever expected, and I'm playing this little song about a vaudeville singer. It's beautiful. She was very kind to me, and I just, they bring beauty into the world. What can you say? That's it.
Well, then, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Pleasure talking to you. And
thank you. Until the next time. Bye now. Bye bye.